Hi, everyone. I think we'll get started here in just a few minutes.
Hi Erica, how you doing?
Hi, good.
It looks like I'm on and it looks like let me see if I can. Yes, my camera's working as well. I'll leave it off for now, but it looks like we'll be good to go.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I enabled your camera and your microphone for you.
Thanks, Erica.
And just to check, can you all see my screen right now?
I can see it, Erica, for sure.
Okay, perfect.
And Erica, I'm gonna drop that Mentimeter link and passcode into the chat so it's there when the time comes.
Okay, that sounds good. We might need to drop it in a couple of times because I don't know if everyone will have access to the chat that it was
But
entered
that's
before they
true.
joined the
You're
meeting.
right. You're right. I'll just wait.
Tina, do you want to go ahead and get started? Or do you want to wait a couple more minutes and see if more people will trickle in?
I'd like to give it just like 2 more minutes. I know we had
Okay.
almost 70-ish
Yeah.
people, that
Okay.
registered. It worries me that only 10 are on so far, but hopefully a couple more will pop on in the next 2 minutes or so, and
Yeah.
then I'll gladly get going.
Okay.
All right. Well, since it is 6:32, I'm going to get it started. Let me turn on my camera so I could say hi to you all. So welcome to our climate adaptation meeting for the City of Boca Raton. I'm Tina Beto Jennings. I'm the sustainability manager with the city. I started in October, and this project had already received its grant funding. And the grant funding comes from a Resilient Florida grant. And this is actually an extension of the city's climate change vulnerability assessment, which was conducted multi-jurisdictionally. So various coastal communities in Palm Beach County came together for that multi-jurisdictional vulnerability assessment. And from that vulnerability assessment, there are key factors in terms of climate hazards that were recognized as being um, generating the most hazards for the city. So, our next step in becoming a more resilient community is taking that information from the vulnerability assessment and moving towards actionable items, which can help enhance our resilience. So, some of the beginning of our meeting today, we'll cover what was in that vulnerability assessment. It's also available to you on the sustainability website. So if you go to www.myboca.us/sustainability, you'll be able to find the link to that vulnerability assessment. It's also in the details for that were present for registering for the event. So you could find it in multiple spaces. You can also feel free to email me if you need to access that vulnerability assessment. Again, though, we're going to hit on the main ideas of that vulnerability assessment and how we're going to be building from it to make our climate adaptation action plan, which is going to have clearly defined projects to make the city more resilient. And this is why we need your input. You guys are the boots on the ground in the city. We often get cordoned off in our sectors, and we don't always know what's going on in other sections of the city when there are some major storm events. So your input today is going to be really crucial in helping us develop this adaptation action plan. Um, as part of our grant, we were able to partner with AECOM. So AECOM is our environmental engineering consultant that we have a continuing services agreement with in the city. So we've partnered on many projects in the past, and they are well equipped to help us in preparing our climate adaptation action plan. So without further ado, I will introduce Erica Harris from AECOM, and she's going to get us started with our meeting. And there's going to be multiple opportunities for you guys to ask questions. There are certain sections when there's going to be public input where you're going to be linked to a website where you're going to take a survey in real time. So as those things come up in the presentation, we'll give you the instructions on how to access them. So again, just thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time in helping to make Boca a more resilient community. All right, so Erica, all set for you to go ahead.
All right, thanks, Tina. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight to kick off this important project with the city. So here's a brief look at our agenda for this meeting. We'll start off by providing a brief overview of the project and kind of build on what Tina was already discussing and set the context for this work. Next, we'll briefly go over some of the findings of the city's climate vulnerability assessment, and then we'll have our first breakout exercise where we will hear feedback from participants on the call, really just to confirm some of the biggest climate vulnerabilities and concerns for the city. Next, we'll jump back into the presentation and go over the approach that we're using to develop the Climate Adaptation Action Plan, or the CAAP that we're calling it for short. And then we'll have our final breakout exercise to hear more about some of your priorities that will provide the basis for this plan. And then finally, we'll go into our next steps of the process and we'll wrap up the call. Okay, so let's jump in. So as Tina mentioned, the city is conducting a climate adaptation action plan to do a few things. It's really to help guide the city in developing their climate resilience goals. It's to improve the city's FEMA resilient community rating system standing. And then probably the most important part of this is to develop a list of projects that are going to reduce the climate hazard impacts to vulnerable infrastructure. This project, as Tina said, is funded by the state of Florida as a part of a three-phase program. So the first phase, which the city has already completed, is the vulnerability assessment to scan the city's facilities and infrastructure and identify what is most at risk due to climate hazard impacts. The next step, which is the phase that we are currently in, is to identify a list of strategies to address those vulnerabilities that were identified in phase one. And then completion of these two steps sets the city up to be eligible for funding from the state for infrastructure projects. So that's the next step of this process. As I mentioned, the city has already completed their citywide vulnerability assessment back in 2021. This assessment was part of a regional project for 8 different communities across Southeast Palm Beach County. And it really serves as the basis for understanding what kinds of places are most at risk to really a variety of different climate hazards facing the area. And what do I mean when I say climate hazards? Well, the study looked at a wide variety of different shocks and stressors that could affect the region. So it was everything from rainfall, flooding, and extreme heat to pest and disease outbreaks. So they looked at a lot of things. And to focus our efforts for the CAAP, we're going to be narrowing our concerns down to the top 5 climate hazards that I'm showing here. So it's high winds, rainfall-induced flooding, tidal flooding, storm surge from large hurricanes, and extreme heat. And so to give you an idea about some of the key vulnerabilities that were identified for the city as a part of this report, the group leading the study found that rainfall-induced flooding was the biggest flood threat overall because it causes the greatest amount of flooding across the city. High tide and storm surge impacts are still a large concern, but they're primarily limited to the communities along the eastern side of the city. Areas noted as the most exposed to extreme heat impacts include the urban areas south of the airport, where there's a lot of development and there's limited tree canopy coverage and vegetation. And the asset category of parks and cultural properties were found to have the highest vulnerability to high wind events. The study also provided a top city and non-city owned assets of concern. So the top city-owned assets are focused on the fire rescue stations number 3, 5, and 6, as well as the Boca Raton Housing Authority. Identified non-city-owned assets were educational facilities near the coast and canal waterfront areas, the Florida Atlantic University campus, an FPL substation, and a SunTrust Bank location. Okay, so now that we've gone over what the mapping analysis results told us is most vulnerable, we want to hear your perspectives of hazard impacts and how they affect you and your community. So we're going to use this tool called Mentimeter to get this feedback. So if you could use either your phone or your computer, open up another browser and go to menti.com and enter the code that you see at the top of the screen. And I think Tina's going to paste this in the chat as well. So once you do this, it's going to take you to our feedback forms. And then once you're there, you'll be prompted to enter your results for our test question that you're seeing here, just to make sure that you're familiar with how the tool works. So this isn't a real question that we're going to be using, but this is just a kind of a dummy question to get everybody on the same page.
Erica, sorry
Yep.
to interrupt, but I did drop the information into the chat. And I would also, I can be monitoring the chat. So in case anybody has questions, feel free to either type it in or just raise your hand and we can reach out to you. But it looks like you guys are getting it. Good job.
When you enter your favorite season, press the submit button, and then your entry is going to be uploaded automatically and anonymously in real time, as you see on the screen now. We'll give just a couple minutes for everybody to try it out. Is there anybody that's not able to figure out how it works? Just raise your hand and we can kind of talk through it, because other people might be having issues as well. Okay, so we got 20 people in the chat. We've got 8 respondents. I'm going to give it another minute to see if we get a few more. So far, winter is leading. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move forward and we'll get to the real questions. So the first one asks, which of the climate hazards that we're going to focus on for this plan are you most concerned about when you think about how it could affect you and your community? So there's tidal flooding, there's rainfall-induced flooding, storm surge, high winds, and extreme heat. Okay. We'll give us just another minute. So we have 10 respondents. There's still some people, it seems like, that aren't voting. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand in the middle of the top of your meeting screen. There's a little hand that says raise, and you can raise that and we can kind of talk through any troubleshooting to make sure you're able to vote.
I do see a question, a hand going up. Erica, are you able to unmute?
Yeah, let me see. Carl, I think I can do that. Okay, Carl, you should be able to unmute yourself now. We can't hear you. You're still muted. Yeah, I don't have the ability to unmute someone other than enabling their microphone.
Alternatively, if you can't unmute, you can always type the question into the chat. All right, I think we're
Okay.
gonna have to keep on
Okay.
moving forward.
Yep.
But Carl, if you are able to get it into the chat, I'm happy to help you along.
Okay, so it looks like storm surge is the biggest concern for the community. Does anybody want to say anything about that? About why they picked storm surge? Or is this in general agreement with the group? Oh, go to Monica. Okay, Monica, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. Okay, Julie, I just unmuted you as well.
Oh, here, I finally unmuted myself.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you.
Honestly,
You have to
I
use the
started to get so
icon on the
nervous.
Yeah, I
top.
was trying to use my little square.
So was I.
Yeah. So I think storm surge is important. We've been very, very lucky here in Boca Raton. I'll just give you some. I'm the former deputy mayor of the city, so I have a lot of information in my head. We've been lucky for the past 20 years that we haven't really seen a lot of like heavy duty storms here. We've had some pass by, but we've been pretty lucky in terms of storm surge. But storm surge can just be so devastating, not just for those on the actual coastline, but even inward, off more inland than even people imagine. So I think that's important to understand. People see rainfall induced flooding all the, pretty often. It is important because there are different areas of the city that are vulnerable to that based on location. But, in addition to sunny day flooding, but I think storm surge, because it could be caught off guard. I think that needs to be addressed so that the next big storm that comes through here, that we are prepared.
Yeah, totally agree. We have been very lucky the past few years. I mean, if you look at the west coast of Florida, they have had the opposite experience where they keep getting hit, it seems, every year, and you get to see those destructive images of flooding just going miles inland.
Exactly.
This is Julia Stagner. I also selected storm surge basically for a lot of the reasons that Monica stated. I am a newer Boca Ratonian, and while I have not had the opportunity to experience a significant weather event, I have friends and family on the Gulf side, and the stories are horrific. We've all seen the images on the news, and I believe that for me and my household, storm surge would definitely be my biggest concern. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing, Julia. Anyone else before we move to the next question? Okay, so the next question focuses on the areas of the city that you feel are already most affected by flooding. And to kind of help answer this, we've divided the city up into quadrants, with I-95 being the east-west divider, and then Glades Road being the north-south divider. And so we're asking you to select the quadrant of the city that you think is most at risk to flooding based on your experience and knowledge and what you see in the city. So is it maybe the northwest or the southwest areas, which are mostly residential? Is it the northeast area with the universities, or maybe it's the southeast area of the city that has the city center? Mm. I think there's a lot of votes for the southeast area. While we're waiting for people to finish up, anybody want to say anything about why they selected the southeast, or I mean any of them really, but just curious why so many people selected southeast.
If I may,
Yeah.
I mean, I would have chosen Northeast and Southeast if I could have, only because there are a lot of, you know, residential areas in both of those sections. And the intercoastal is right there, and the beach is right there. The barrier island is there. And I understand that, you know, flooding will happen anywhere, especially as our seas begin to rise. We could see, and I know the city has moved some wells to try to protect our wells from saltwater intrusion. So I think there's a lot of vulnerability in every location in the city. But I think the further north you go, just in general in the state, things get a little better. I mean, I know this isn't very much north from the south, you know, here in Boca, but we do have a ridge a little bit in the southeast, like on 4th Avenue, where Boca Christian is. Up in there is a high spot in the city, but water flows through its least resistance, you know. So if it's it's flooding from rain, then all of that'll go downhill and cause flooding in those areas. But so that's why I chose the southeast, only because of the number of homes, the barrier island, even though I know the barrier island also is included in the northeast. So I would have done both if I could have.
Okay. Yeah, they're kind of getting the double whammy there in the northeast and southeast with the rainfall, and they also have the tidal and coastal storm surge flooding. Anyone want to say anything about the southwest or northwest? We got one vote for each of those.
I will admit to not effectively reading the question. I picked Northwest after reading the expanded report and I spend a lot of time in that zone up by FAU, and I can see where that would absolutely in the future be a big problem. I've never actually been near campus during a significant rain event, though I have in other geographies of the country survived the dreaded 100-year and the 200-year flood events, and I don't recommend it.
I actually will chime in here just for a moment on this. I also did choose the southeast, just knowing what I know from the vulnerability assessment. But one thing that does really worry me about the northeast quadrant is we had brought it up before about the heat island effect there and the low tree canopy having so much impervious surface and no trees to help soak up any of the floodwaters. It's worrisome that a major storm event, we're not going to have any biological means of helping sequester that water. So we as a city are trying to focus some of our tree planting efforts in that area, but I think that's a good thing to keep in mind during our planning process.
Can I ask one question or have one statement on that? I agree with you, but also the city should be, and I know that this is kind of controversial, maybe. You know, the Beach and Parks District has that big Boca Chica land that was a golf course that now there are lakes and stuff on that property that could be used for stormwater retention. I don't know what's going on with the Hidden Valley old golf course, but that used to have a whole lot of stormwater retention in there too. If and or when these areas get developed, they should maintain their ability to hold some stormwater in there, just to protect the Northeast.
Yes, I think that should definitely, be considered as part of the planning process.
Yeah. Great.
Okay, let's shift gears a little. We want to hear about how extreme heat days in the summer might affect your daily activities. So for this one, the options are not at all, so you weren't affected by extreme heat, or yes, your activities are affected with some modification to your activity, like maybe you were still able to go for a walk, but you had to do it in the morning, maybe before temperatures got too hot. There's also an option for yes with significant modification of the activity, like maybe you were still able to go for the walk, but you had to do it at a place like the town center mall because it was just too hot outside. And there's also, yes, you were affected because you actually had to cancel your activity. Like maybe you just don't walk at all in the summer anymore because it's just too uncomfortable. Well, it seems like everyone is affected on some level so far. I'm curious what kind of revisions that you had to make. Anybody wants to share? We can get maybe a couple responses before we move on.
I'll share. People are probably getting tired of hearing from me.
Go ahead,
Um,
Monica.
but I literally have become a snowbird. I've lived in Florida since 1972, so for most of my life, and I've become a snowbird. I go elsewhere in the summer now, especially now that I can since I'm not on council anymore.
Yeah.
I echo that. I we stay until May, and we head north for relief. But when I am here and the temperatures start to heat up, which hopefully they're going to do shortly, um, anything that needs to get done gets done first thing in the morning.
Mhm.
Sometimes even before the sun comes up. You know, walking, grocery shopping, and then in for the day or off to the pool.
Yeah.
With the shade, of course, and plenty of sunscreen.
You're definitely not alone in kind of splitting where you spend your time and only being here for the best parts of the year.
I have a brother who lives here full time, and I was complaining one day about it being warm, and he looked at me and he said, "You don't know warm." I beg to differ. I survived the summer of 2020 here, so I
Yeah.
think I did okay.
You did your
And I
time.
came back.
Yeah.
I came back.
Okay, so let's do this last question of this section. This one's a little different. So rather than being multiple choice, we want to hear in your own words a brief statement about how you were affected when community spaces that you love are not accessible due to climate hazards. So, for example, when you can't go kayaking or play tennis outside because it's too hot, or you can't go to the park or to a grocery store because the streets are flooded, how does that affect you and those that you know in your community? And these don't need to be long paragraphs. We're just really looking for quick sound bites to quickly convey these community impacts. Like maybe I try to leave work early on days when we're expecting heavy rain so I don't get stuck in traffic, something like that. And again, these are all anonymous, so you don't have to be shy about your responses. And you can also enter multiple responses if you want while we're waiting for people to fill in their bubbles. We got one response makes me rethink why we live here. Economic losses, especially when snowbirds return to the north. No significant impact to my family, even though I see how citizens living in higher impact areas will experience more negative events. Lost revenue as parks that have entrance fees or activity fees lose their revenue in high heat in summer. Good point. Due to heat, it gets worse during the seasonal cycle throughout the year. Beach closings always lower quality of life for locals. Extreme heat causes less options for activities and exercise, which leads to less exercise overall, and in the long term, more health risk factors associated with lifestyle. Reduce social interaction. Less opportunities to social. Loss of property values over time. Cost of cleanup following events. There's a concern that popular outdoor summer activities could diminish over time. It's just getting too warm for people to show up. Okay. Another one for reduced property values. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. So thanks again so much for your feedback on these questions. While we have the data, and the numbers from the vulnerability assessment, I think it's always really helpful and important to understand that community perspective of climate hazard impacts, and make sure that this plan is going to align with community priorities. And then speaking of the plan, I do want to spend a few more minutes talking about some of the plan details and to kind of help you understand how it's going to be developed. So when we think about ways to adapt to climate hazards, there are a few ways to really characterize the approaches. So strategies can be physical and focused on structural changes to the assets, like raising it out of a flood zone or maybe adding more trees and shade canopy. They can also be non-physical strategies that are focused more on policy changes, like incorporating sea level rise into the design criteria of projects. We can also make a distinction between asset-specific and area-scale protection. So an asset-specific strategy would focus on elevating like a single building or a single pump station, but at some point, it may not make sense to address everything on this kind of asset-by-asset basis. So we start looking at larger area-scale strategies, like elevating an entire low-lying shoreline that provides protection for multiple assets and infrastructure that are behind it. And because there really is no single solution or project that's going to address all of the hazards in the area, this CAAP or this adaptation plan is really going to reflect a combination of lots of these different approaches to address climate hazard concerns. So I want to quickly run through the steps of this process that we're using to develop the plan. So the first step is to brainstorm strategies. So this is where we'll create that initial list or a menu of adaptation options that the city can consider for the plan. And to build this list, we're going to focus on approaches that are already being used in the Southeast Florida region to promote consistency, but we also want to look outside of the region and look at what's worked for other similar communities elsewhere to kind of bring in best practices from the outside. Next, we'll evaluate each one of the strategies to help prioritize those that have the greatest benefit for the community. So we'll develop a standard set of criteria for the evaluation, and it's likely to include things like social and environmental and economic benefits, as well as engineering feasibility, so that we can make sure that we're recommending strategies that are actually realistic. And then we're going to re-engage with you all. So we'll conduct another round of community engagement, which is next time going to be in person. And we want to hear about your preferences based on the strategies that we've come up with. So we want you to help us further rank them. And then the top 5 strategies are going to be further refined into actual projects that the city can seek for funding. So we'll develop project summaries that include things like project costs and needed partners for the projects, steps for implementation and co-benefits, to really help the city with pursuing these projects for funding. And then lastly, we'll roll all of this information into the overall plan, and then we're going to present it to City Council. And just to reiterate, the primary output of this plan is going to be those details for the top 5 strategies that will be prioritized based on a combination of factors, including the evaluation criteria that I just mentioned, the community preferences, so your input, as well as the input from city staff and department leads that are going to be involved all throughout this process. We want to make sure we understand their needs and priorities and that they're reflected in this plan as well. And just to give you an example of what these project summary sheets could look like, here's an example from another project that we recently completed for the city of Naples. So this documentation includes things like a project description, project benefits, necessary actions to complete the work, cost and time estimates, potential project partners, and potential funding sources to pay for the project. And the idea behind this is that the city can take this information and then easily use it to pursue a grant application or to help justify it for the needs for an internal city budget request. Okay, so now that we've talked a bit about the structure of the plan, we want to hear from the group again. So I have a couple more questions, and this time they're more focused on adaptation preferences. Okay, so for this one, we've grouped the general types of city infrastructure and assets into categories. So we've got arts and cultural sites, businesses, community facilities like schools and libraries. There's life safety, that includes things like hospitals, police and fire, natural areas and open space, transportation, and utilities. And so now we want you to select your top 3 categories in any order that you think the adaptation plan should focus on to protect. So on your screen, select your top 3. It doesn't have to be in any order, and then hit the submit button and it'll populate your responses. Yeah, it's like life safety and utilities that rise into the top. Anybody want to comment on their responses?
I'll do a short comment.
Mhm.
I really think for the safety and well-being of the residents of Boca Raton, our infrastructure, everything that's included in our infrastructure, whether that's which to me is utilities, transportation, meaning roads and sidewalk, transportation type things, definitely our roads, and life safety, fire rescue and police. I really think those are the top 3 things that need to be ensure that we can prioritize for protection.
Yeah, and it's hard to have a city without those things, right?
Right. They're the kind of things that people look for when they're,
Yeah.
when they're paying their taxes or, expecting services from the city.
Exactly, yeah. Anybody want to comment on the arts and cultural sites or businesses and why they picked those?
Did see a hand go up. I think it's Chuck. I don't, Erica, if you're able to unmute him.
Okay, Chuck, I've allowed your microphone, so you should be able to unmute yourself. We can't hear you if you're talking. It looks like you're still muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, not Chuck. Sorry, Allison.
Yeah, it's Chuck and Allison, sorry. So I was actually part of the coastal resiliency study and one of the members of doing it. And so I am pretty familiar with all this stuff. And I just, utilities are huge because, Boca pulls from the Biscayne Aquifer, and the Biscayne Aquifer supposedly only is going to have about 15 to 20 more years of water. It's depleting itself. Florida is kind of really in a big problem with water, and even the South Florida Water Management District has stated, cities have got to go and find secondary sources of water. And I think it's really important that water everybody needs, right? And because the Biscayne Aquifer is a surface aquifer, it's really not it's not a deep aquifer. And so anyway, what I was going to say is we really should be looking into alternate water sources. I know Highland Beach has a desalination plant, reverse osmosis plant. And again, we should probably be looking for something like that, not wait for the time to happen where we don't have enough water or limited supply. So maybe that's really something that we should be looking into.
Yeah, I know some other utilities are doing that too. Tampa Bay Water on the Gulf side, I know
Yeah.
they're starting to diversify their water sources a bit more, and it includes desalinization.
Yeah, and I'm
The
sorry.
improvements in desalination over the last 5 to 10 years are just incredible. The cost has come down significantly. Any of the issues along with other problems with desalination have pretty much gone away at this point. It's used all over the world, in Australia and a lot of other countries, as their mainstay of their water. So I think really we should start planning for that. That's kind of important.
Yeah, sure.
I do think that that is a great point and something definitely worth considering. One thing I will bring up too about our water utility is that we're 100% reuse. So the water that makes its way into our water treatment plant is then used as our gray water, our irrigation water. So we do have that benefit where we're keeping that water in the cycle rather than having it percolate back into the aquifer. Another really interesting thing that we do have to be very careful of, not only are we depleting the aquifer, but as we're depleting it, now you have saltwater intrusion
Absolutely.
into the aquifer itself, which is a very scary thing. So I agree with your point entirely. It's something that you can't not consider it. You have to
Right.
you have to make this a priority because
And that was one of the items that we put in the original study, and as
Yep.
far as concerns, because a lot of people feel because it rains a lot in Florida and so forth that we have just this unlimited supply. And actually, we have very little retention of water in our aquifers.
it's a great point.
Yeah. So, again, I think that Boca, I know they have this big, huge, pretty new, I think it's only like 10 or 15 years old, or I think 10 years old, right? New water plant and so forth. But unfortunately, it was built based on taking water from an aquifer that's drying out. So it's kind of, not, the planning there didn't seem to be well thought out. So anyway, so I just wanted to bring that up because that's really something that's going to take time to, get together and build and switch over. And so, you don't wait until 10 or 15 years to start even thinking about it.
Yeah. And I also would add to that as well, not so much something to put in the plan, but just to keep in mind in terms of sustainability for the city overall, getting people to use less water. How can we reduce our overall use? There are some simple steps that we can all take to help do our part. And I hope in my role I can make a substantial effort to try and bring those numbers down in terms of the gallons per day we're using per capita. So there's multiple different facets to that issue, and we've really got to explore them all. We're at that juncture.
Yes,
If I may, there is an ordinance on the books right now about irrigation, yards, landscaping. So, but it's not really enforced. It's hard to enforce, but it's there. It probably should go down. I think it's sitting at 3 days a week based on your address, which days you can. That should probably go down to 2 days a week. Just something to look at quickly. But I also wanted to bring up, we were talking about the quantity of our water, but we should also look at the quality of our water. We have right about 100 or less homes in the city of Boca Raton that are still on septic. And I think that's another good project for something like this, to get the septic to sewer project in place, to at least say that we are not, working with septic tanks any longer, because they're so antiquated and really harm our water quality. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed too.
Agreed as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just think
Christina?
overall, there's just a systemic issue with water supply, especially in South Florida. So, attention really has to start being put towards that.
True.
Christina, this is Julie Stagner again. For some reason, I can't type anything into the chat, so thank you for letting me get this out. I live in a condo community. There are 720 units. Our water is included in our HOA. From, going from a single family dwelling to a condo, I don't see a water bill here. Now, I know when I've done a lot of laundry at my house up north, because it's reflected in the water bill. Here in a larger condo community, and I know there are many where that's an amenity that's included in your HOA, I think if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. Is there something, Christina, that your department has, or where maybe there's an outreach for condo communities to come and give a presentation on?
Yeah, and I am happy to do things like that. Absolutely. I might even be able to make like an educational video, and that way we could share it with multiple condos at once. I also think that this is where the plan might be able to help us identify, maybe this is an area where we need to build an ordinance for multifamily facilities where they have to benchmark their water usage so we can see how much they're utilizing year over year, and try and make those reductions by implementing some really simple changes. So the plan is one mechanism we have for doing that. And like you said, yeah, it's very simple education sometimes about how to reduce that overall usage, and something I'm happy to do. There was actually a group that asked me to come give a presentation about water conservation. So maybe I'll even have the opportunity to record it there and we can share widely. But yes, I'm happy to do those things, and they're on my agenda for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm seeing in the chat, Danielle said, do we have any opportunities to reduce impervious surfaces? And I think this is another place where this adaptation planning will certainly help us, because we can identify areas that might be very well suited to turning impervious surfaces into bioretention areas, for example. So that can all be part of the plan.
A lot of concern for water. Good to keep in mind
Yes,
for
I love
developing this. Okay, the last question of the meeting. This is another opportunity to pick your top 3 from the list. So we want to hear, what kinds of high-level changes do you think the city should make to prepare for climate hazards? The options include things like upgrading the stormwater system to better accommodate those heavy rainfall events, building in more green space, creating public cooling centers to help residents and visitors deal with extreme heat days, protecting coastlines from flooding using traditional engineering structures like levees and flood walls, restoring wetlands, which is another way to provide coastal protection, but in a more natural way, strengthening buildings to provide protection against extreme weather impacts, or more focused on improving emergency planning for extreme weather. I changed the results of this to be percent, but now I think it looks confusing because I don't know if it's 71% of the total results. I'll have to take a closer look at how those are calculated because the results don't add up to 100.
Sorry, Erica, I was the one that said, oh, it would be nice if it had the percentage. Overall, though, where it says 71%, each of those look like about 25% in
Yeah.
actuality. Oh, now it's all shifting. That's strange.
Okay, there's a lot of focus on restoring wetlands, upgrading stormwater system, and building more green spaces and trees. Let me give it a couple more seconds here for people to finish voting.
Oh, I see a comment in the chat. It
Mhm.
says, could you elaborate on examples of cooling centers? And Erica, did you have anything specific in mind for that, or do you want me to
Yeah, so a
field
lot of
it?
times cooling centers they're public spaces that already exist. Like libraries are oftentimes a cooling center, and so it's a place that people can go to just get reprieve temporarily from the heat. It can even be an outdoor kind of area though, where you have like misters, where you have like just misting machines that are running with fans that people can go there and just kind of get a few minutes of relief from our summers. So it's having an organized place and publicizing it to make sure that everybody knows that it's there if they need it.
And I saw Danielle commented, definitely difficult to choose just three, and it is. But I
Yeah.
gotta say, like, it is great to see that there seems to be a lot of emphasis on the biological restoration to help deal with these issues because nature knows best for sure. In a lot of the conferences I've been to lately, so many examples on the West Coast of where restoration had taken place to restore natural shorelines from where they were once hardened infrastructure, like a seawall. The places that had been restored to a more natural dune system responded so much better during the storm events. There was an image where the restored beach literally looked like nothing had happened to it. Meanwhile, where you had the seawall, there was a lot of erosion in front of it.
Mhm.
All of the assets behind it were inundated. So it is amazing to see what the right biological restoration can do. So I think it's very heartening to see that many of you are on board with those. And yes, tree planting on everyone's mind as well, for sure.
I think that we all learned, there were some really great learnings, unfortunately, that came out of Katrina.
Hmm.
Levees work in the short term. Lake Okeechobee, 1928. There are countless examples around the globe of
Mhm.
where we have installed man-made solutions when we've spent the duration of our humanity altering where water goes. A prime example is the Gulf. And when we start reducing wetlands and those buffer zones, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So we can put up all the seawalls we want. Nature, as I think, Tina, you said it earlier, nature will find a way. Over, under, around, she will find a way. So
I did, there's a question in the chat, like a procedural one. How will this presentation translate to city procedure changes? So that as we're developing the plan, if there's a city procedure we would like to change, if we would like to set an ordinance to, for instance, develop a project, develop an ordinance where if you're developing a new area and it's already 100% impervious surface, you have to reduce that impervious surface by 10%. That would be a procedural change and an ordinance change that we might present in the plan. That's just an example, but there are yeah, there's just many different ways we can move forward from here in deciding how we want to build our climate adaptation action plan and what those specific procedures are going to look like. So this is step one of the process. And already I've been excited to hear so much of what you guys have to say. It's really enlightening.
Yeah, and that's a good transition for the next steps of this plan. I mean, these results are really going to help us understand that the baseline community priorities that are going to form the foundation from this plan. So I do want to go over a couple of the next steps. So here's an overview of our project schedule. Like Tina said, we're just kicking off this project, and we're currently in the public engagement meeting #1 phase. Over the spring and the summer, we're going to be putting together that initial list of strategies and the draft plan before we take it back out to the community in late summer for your feedback again. Next winter and spring, we're going to be gathering details for those top 5 projects that come out of that step, and then wrap up the final version and the presentation of the plan in the spring. That's kind of a 10,000-foot view of the plan. But for the immediate next steps, we're going to start by summarizing the great feedback that we heard today and use that as a start on the initial strategy list that we're going to form the basis of the plan. We're also going to start developing the evaluation criteria that will be needed to understand those trade-offs among the various strategies that are on that initial list so that we can rank them in a sort of a standardized way and prioritize those that have the greatest benefits for the community. Then I'm going to pass it over to Tina to talk about how we can all stay connected and how we can wrap up the meeting.
Yes, so first of all, again, Erica, thank you just so much for putting the presentation together and partnering with us on this project. And thank all of you for your incredibly valuable input. You guys are so well informed already. And I think that we're going to be able to really put together a nice, cohesive, robust plan that can help us become more resilient into the future. So as Erica already mentioned, this coming summer, after we've developed a draft of the CAAP, and again, that's going to involve city staff coming together, the results that we've developed from today's meeting, and outlining what some of these prioritized projects will look like. And then at the next public meeting that we have, again, we're not sure of what the format of that public meeting is going to look like yet, but there will be more details to follow. So please stay apprised of the project on the city's website. It will be updated. And then during that forum, you guys will have a chance to come together, look at the draft of the plan, really help us prioritize where we want different projects. Do we want different projects? Did we miss something in the drafting of the plan that's essential? That's going to be the time for you to use your voice on it. Our climate resiliency page is linked here for you. And this entire recording will be posted to the climate resiliency page. So this link will always be available to you. And another great way to stay informed of what's going on is to sign up for the sustainability email blast. If you go to myboca.us/sustainability, there is a link to sign up for the newsletter. It goes out quarterly, but we also will put out an email blast when there are important upcoming events to remind you of them. So those are all ways that you can stay in the know on this. And I think that's it. It's just about 7:30, so we're going to have to wrap up. But really quickly, before I do wrap up, there's going to be multiple events that are coming up for Earth Month. So I'm just going to, again, encourage you to get to the sustainability webpage and be on that mailing list so you can see all of the great things that are coming up for our city. All right. Does anybody have any final questions? in our last minute here?
Thank you very much for doing this.
Yes, of course. And thank you guys so much for the comments that I'm getting. These are fabulous. I really appreciate all of your time. I know it's late. Everybody's getting back from work, getting ready for bed, all those things, but you guys are here and that means a lot. All right. So Erica, I think we're all set to wrap up. And after we have the recording, I'll be posting it to the website.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody.